All right, so I decided to do my kinesiology movement analysis on dribbling a basketball. I know someone else did shooting a free throw, so I decided to do something similar because I like to play basketball for fun. So I thought it'd be cool to look into everything that's involved with dribbling a basketball. So I wasn't really sure how much people knew about basketball, so I added the little GIF there on the left to show someone dribbling. There's many different ways someone could dribble a basketball. Those who played basketball would know that there's a bunch of different dribble moves you can do. But in those different dribble moves might activate different muscles and movements. But we're only going to focus on what happens in the arm, wrist, and hand when doing just like a simple dribble up and down. So first off, before we get real into it, I just kind of want to identify all the bones that are located in all the parts associated with dribbling a basketball. So that would be the arm, wrist, and hand. So starting off with the arm, there's only really three bones you have to worry about here: the humerus, the ulna, and the radius. And if you look at the little image on the side, you can see all three of them. So those are the three bones in the arm. So I decided to include the bones in the wrist and the hand and just put them all in one slide. So this image really shows you all of them. And if I were to read all these off to you, I'd probably butcher half the names. But if you look at below the wrist, you can see the ulna and the radius that were described in the last slide. And then you guys should recognize a lot of these bones because we did talk about them in class. So you can see the scaphoid, the the trapezoid, and then the three regions of the hand: the carpus, metacarpus, and phalanges. If you look to the right, you could see those three areas. So those are pretty important to know. Um, yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of muscles located in the arm. This picture actually doesn't even show all of them, but it shows a lot of the ones that are involved with dribbling a basketball. I don't want to go too much into it yet because I have a couple slides that literally point out which muscles are incorporated. But I wanted to include this so you can kind of see all the muscles here, or a lot of them. You guys should be able to recognize a bunch of these, like the acromion, the supraspinatus muscle, infraspinatus, teres minor. We'll talk a lot about those ones later too. The deltoids. Um, they also showed a couple nerves here, like the ulnar nerve. The brachioradialis muscle is another important one that we'll talk about in a little bit here. So yeah, I kind of wanted to include this so you could see just from a glance all of the muscles or a lot of them, and then later we're going to point out which ones are the ones that are really important when dribbling a basketball. So again, here are the muscles located in the wrist and hand. Um, a lot of them should be familiar to you guys. We talked a lot about them in class, so I recognized a lot of these, like the flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris. Um, and then all the ones in the hands, you can see the lumbricals. And we're gonna talk again. We're gonna talk more about these muscles in the next couple slides, where we talk about which specific muscles help us dribble a basketball. All right, so here's the good stuff. So the first muscle that I'd say is really important when dribbling a basketball would be the biceps brachii. I hope I pronounced that right. This muscle is responsible for flexing the elbow, and it's involved in the upward motion of the dribble. So when you pull the ball back up, I have a video attached where I just dribble a basketball a couple times. When you see that, I'll really break down um, what's happening because you might not understand the upward motion and the downward motion of the dribble. But I'll point that out when we get to that video. But the biceps brachii is what's helping the upward motion of the dribble when you bring the ball up before you push it back down. And so now we have the triceps brachii, which is pretty much the opposite. So this is a muscle that's in charge of extending the elbow and it helps with the downward motion of the dribble. So you use the biceps brachii to help with the upward motion, and then the triceps brachii is what helps push the ball back down towards the ground. The deltoids are also used when dribbling a basketball. So these are the muscles that are responsible for lifting the arm, and they're involved again in the upward motion of the dribble. So if you think about it, when you bring the ball up, you're going to activate those deltoids. So that's another muscle that's involved with the upward motion. So it's not just the biceps brachii. Before I go on here, I did look it up, and I guess I was pronouncing it wrong. It's actually brachii. Um, I guess some people say brachii, but I wanted to point that out because it's a little embarrassing. But I didn't want to go back and have to redo all my audio recordings. So let's move on. The rotator cuff muscles are also involved with dribbling a basketball. And we talked a lot about these in class. So if you remember the acronym SITS, that's supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. So these four are actually all used, and they're responsible for stabilizing the shoulder joint, and they're involved in the movement of the arm during dribbling. So these muscles are also activated and help with the movement of the arm, both upward and downward motions when dribbling. Pretty much wherever your arm's moving, the rotator cuff is helping with that. Okay, lastly, let's talk about the wrist and hand muscles, or mostly wrist, the muscles in the lower arm and wrist that are involved with dribbling a basketball. So we have the wrist flexor and extensor muscles. These muscles are responsible for controlling the movement of the wrist, and they're involved in the direction of the dribble. So if you think about it, you use your wrist a lot when you dribble. You kind of push your wrist down. You should be able to see it in the video on the next slide. But this image to the left shows you the wrist flexor and extensor muscles. So the wrist flexors, like the flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, and palmaris longus. I'm definitely not pronouncing those right. Those are involved with wrist flexion, which is what's important for controlling the upward motion of the basketball. So when you're bringing that basketball back up, you're using a lot of the wrist flexor muscles. And then wrist extensors, those are the extensor carpi radialis, extensor carpi ulnaris, and extensor digitorum. Those are involved with wrist extension, which again is just like the opposite. That's what's important for helping that downward motion of the basketball. So when you're pushing it back down. So those muscles do a lot when you're dribbling the basketball too. You use a lot of the wrist muscles, because you're always pushing the ball back down and pushing it up, and you use a lot of the wrist. So here's the video. I tried to attach it to this of me just dribbling a basketball. I couldn't do it too many times because I was inside. I didn't want my neighbors to get mad at me. But I kind of emphasized the upward motion a lot. Usually you probably wouldn't put that much emphasis into putting your hand that low on the ball. But I just really wanted you guys to see that there is really two motions to dribbling. It usually doesn't look this dramatic, but there's a downward push motion towards the ground, and then there's a motion where you kind of help the ball up and prepare for your next dribble down. So you can kind of see that. So if you look close, you can see the whole arm. Like if you look close and watch the upper arm, you definitely see a lot of muscles working there. And then you see the arm moving up and down. And then again, the wrist is where a lot of the movement occurs, because you can see it helping the ball up and pushing the ball back down with the wrist. So you can kind of see all the muscles in play there if you look closely. And lastly, before we get wrapped up here, I wanted to talk about the contractions that occur when dribbling a basketball. We talked a lot about different types of contractions throughout the year, so I thought it'd be important because concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions all occur in a way during dribbling. So there's a way you could talk about all three. So let's talk about concentric contractions first. So the muscles that flex the elbow and wrist have concentric contractions, because that's what raises the ball and brings it towards the body. The biceps and brachialis muscles contract concentrically to flex the joint, the elbow joint, while the wrist flexor muscles contract concentrically to flex the wrist. So those are all muscles that we talked about in the previous slides. So you can kind of see that concentric contractions are occurring here to help with the upward motion and when dribbling the basketball. Eccentric contractions. So these are the muscles that extend the elbow and wrist. So these are eccentric contractions that control the ball as it moves towards the ground. So again, we kind of talked about this in previous slides. So concentric contractions are what help bring the ball up, and then eccentric contractions are what brings the ball down towards the ground. So the triceps muscle contracts eccentrically to slow the extension of the elbow, while the wrist extensor muscles contract eccentrically to control the ball when it's going towards the ground. If you didn't have control of the ball when it was going towards the ground, it could go anywhere. So you really need those wrist extensor muscles to help push the ball down where you want it to land, not just anywhere. And then we have some isometric contractions too. So these would be the muscles that stabilize the arm and the hand, and it helps it maintain a stable position and control the movement of the ball. So again, these are what really help. These contractions are what help you dribble the ball where you want to dribble it. It helps with just knowing where you want to dribble the ball. Because if you didn't have these, the ball could just bounce anywhere. The muscles in the shoulder, elbow, wrist, and hand all go through isometric contractions to help maintain the proper alignment and angle needed to dribble the ball effectively. And so this last slide, I just included some of the works cited for the information. And yeah, I hope you guys learned a little bit more about dribbling a basketball. It seems like such a simple thing, but there is a lot of muscles at work in the body when doing such a simple task. So I thought it was really cool how you could being able to break down something so simple and look into everything that happens when dribbling a basketball. So yeah, thank you guys.